From campus sustainability to coastal restoration, this honor student is proving that environmental advocacy can start right here at USF. Stay tuned. Hey Honors Bulls, welcome to the Honor Roll Podcast, the flagship podcast of the Judy Genschaft Honors College Podcast Network. I'm your host, Fabiana Requena, a fourth-year honors student studying marketing and business analytics. This week, I have a very special co-host, Giselle Lubeck, who is a first-year student majoring in political science and mass communications, and it's her first time here on the podcast. Welcome, Giselle.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My peer mentor, Calvin, on the marketing team brought me onto this project,
Well, as always, we like to start the podcast off with one big question. So my question this week actually requires a little bit of context. I'm sure you've seen all the trendy water bottles online, whether that's on Instagram, TikTok, whatever. It seems like there's a new one every season. And although we all love our reusable water bottles, I have one too. Do you think it's actually sustainable to own several of them?
No. Because that's so consumerist. You have to buy one and use it and stick to it until it breaks or dents or something.
I definitely agree with that. And, although we see all these videos online of people showing off their collections, you might not realize how much goes into producing a single water bottle, all the materials that it requires, all the emissions that go into producing this lovely water bottle. So I think sticking to one is best. And this week, we'll be joined by Oliver Laczko, a St. Petersburg honors student who's studying environmental science and policy and driving change through research, leadership, and community engagement. He'll be sharing how his work in sustainability and environmental action is helping shape a greener future for USF and Tampa Bay. All that and more coming up next.
Hi, I'm Dr. Andrew Hargrove, and I lead the Sustainable Futures Commitment here at the Honors College. So some advice that I have for freshmen is to stay curious. Take every opportunity that you can to explore and do all the fun things that college has to offer. It's not just work. There are so many interesting and amazing things happening here, and you never know what you'll uncover. Thank you so much for listening. Now let's get back to the episode.
Welcome to the podcast, Oliver. It's so nice to have you today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Oliver Laczko. I'm a senior at USF St. Pete campus. I'm studying environmental science and policy with minors in biology and geographic information systems.
Amazing. So you're visiting us from the USF St. Petersburg campus today. Thanks for making the drive over.
No problem.
Tell us what it's like to be a student there and what made you choose the St. Pete campus over the Tampa or Sarasota.
So, funny story, I didn't choose the St. Pete campus. The St. Pete campus was chosen for me. I ended up applying to USF pretty late in my senior year of high school. And so when I did apply to USF, I think I don't remember which campus I checked off on the application, but when I ultimately got accepted into USF, I was told that I was accepted to St. Pete. And after touring both Tampa and St. Pete campus, I basically said, "All right, let's go for it. Let's see what a year in St. Pete is like," because I had visited the city of St. Petersburg just a couple years prior. So when I went to go visit and I checked the place out, I really liked it. I liked the environment. I loved that it was downtown and really close to the water. I grew up in South Florida, so being near water is very important to me. I feel like it's definitely part of a lifestyle I love, going to the beach and just being around just, waterfront districts, etc. So in that aspect, I almost felt at home, if that makes sense, being so close to water and being in such an urban place. And so after my first year, there was this feeling I had that was essentially, yeah, this is home for at least the next couple of years. And I plan to graduate as a St. Pete student, and I will always say that I'm a proud USF St. Pete grad.
It's funny how that happened kind of serendipitously. It was very meant to be. But I definitely feel that thing about like being, from a place that's close to the water and like wanting to stay there. I think about that now. I'm like, where am I going to go post grad? And I'm like, I need to be somewhere close to the water. I feel like
Same.
I don't want to be landlocked.
Yeah, for me, I love coastal science. Restoration is a big part of what I want to study: coastal ecology, coastal wetlands, and so I would love to study at least post undergrad in a place that has a lot of those. I find that it's they're not only incredible ecosystems, but they're also very familiar in a way, and to me that is very important. I want to feel in a place that I can really connect to easily, and I feel like coastal places are one of those things.
So, did you know that you wanted to study environmental science before coming to USF, or was that an interest that you kind of developed here?
Oh yeah, I absolutely did. When I was applying in high school, I was looking for environmental science programs, and it was interesting because there's environmental science programs and then environmental studies programs, and the only difference is that there for environmental studies programs, there's more of a a human element almost. It's almost like the difference between like a bachelor of science and a bachelor of arts. There's more, sociodynamics integrated into environmental studies, and I am going to be graduating with environmental sciences as my background. When I first came to USF, I knew I wanted to study the environment. At the time, I was really interested in environmental justice as a topic, how the environmental sciences can be used to protect vulnerable communities, both physically and socioeconomically. But I also really had a knack for journalism for some reason. I think it was just because leaving high school, I was really exposed to a lot of journalism that talked about environmental justice issues. And I felt like that was a really great way to talk about those injustices and those inequalities. And then as I progressed through college, I found that, environmental justice is a very interesting topic to me, but I definitely wanted to go a more scientific, focused route. I think it just happened naturally, where restoration ended up tying into coastal wetlands, and going back to where I grew up, I would go into the Everglades a lot with my family. I have really early memories of my dad taking me out to some of the lookout points along Alligator Alley, I-75, looking out onto some of the marshes in the Everglades. Those memories, I think, were very formative for me, and in that way, it's funny because during college, I kind of reflected on my life in those particular aspects, and it was able to help me. It helped guide me and basically steer my way through the focuses that I have now, where restoration and wetland ecology is my main focus. And of course, interconnected to those topics are themes of environmental justice, right? Resilience, sustainability. And in that manner, I think it all kind of it came together in just one perfect package. And so I think it's a testament to how much someone's interests can really change in college, but also how influential early childhood memories can ultimately shape the the path of someone later in their adult life.
Yeah. And how influential it is to have your different passions kind of intertwined together. I know in my comparative politics class we had a project on environmental policy in Jamaica, and it was just interesting to see the different disciplines sort of overlap in that. It was something I had never seen before, so it's always nice to further your passions in college and go down even more rabbit holes in that.
I can't agree more. And for me, environmental science is, I think, the best route for my academic, uh, you know, notions, just because it's so interdisciplinary. At least for the major at USF, it involves chemistry and biology, and but then it also integrates, unlike a major like marine biology or just integrative biology, it includes those aspects of human society, and I think that is just for me, um, the environment and humans are completely integrated with each other. Um, Humans have had a tremendous impact on the environment, a tremendous footprint on the environment, and it is so influential towards investigations of the environmental sciences. So yeah, I mean, I can't agree with you more. It is completely intertwined with one another, the humanities and environmental science.
I honestly wasn't even aware of how the curriculum in environmental
Hmm.
science and policy works. But it sounds very interdisciplinary in its nature, where you get to get
Yeah.
like the best of both worlds, right?
Absolutely. Me and my good friend Juliana, who is an environmental science major and is a part of leadership in honestly pretty much the same organizations that I am, we've had these conversations before where at times we think to ourselves, okay, do we want to study the environmental sciences, or were we just better off getting like a geography degree or a chemistry degree or a biology degree? Because at times it feels like those majors are so important for a lot of scientific work, for the professions and the careers that we want to go into. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, we both, Juliana and I, have experiences that just reaffirm the fact that we love the environmental sciences so much because it's interdisciplinary. We don't have one secular focus. We have many, whether that be sustainability or biology, or chemistry and geology. Environmental science allows the integration of that interdisciplinary study, and I think that's just what we love about it so much. So yeah, it's cool. It's cool, man.
So to get a better idea of your involvement, do you think you could walk us through projects that you've led or that you're currently leading right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So my good friend Juliana that I mentioned earlier. So we're both part of the Student Green Energy Fund. We underwent a consolidation in the spring, so that let me backtrack. The Student Green Energy Fund is a student-led, student-organized club at USF that utilizes the green fee, which is essentially for every credit hour that a student at USF registers for. So if I'm taking a class that's 3 credit hours, that student gives $3 to the Student Green Energy Fund. And then that sum of money is then utilized to fund and implement sustainable initiatives on campus. A consolidation occurred in the spring where the green fee was consolidated into one lump sum of money instead of being distributed to each campus based on population size. So Tampa campus before consolidation had the largest sum of money because they have the most students registered there, St. Pete and then Sarasota chronologically. And so Juliana and I, she currently serves as chair of the Student Green Energy Fund, the student led organization in St. Petersburg. And I was chair of that organization last year before consolidation. And we both serve as voting members on the Green Fee Council, which is a consolidated body that is now designated as the organization that funds sustainable initiatives now. So there was a bit of remixing after consolidation, right? We wanted to try and preserve the student organization of it because that's very important for engaging students towards sustainability. A lot of what Juliana and I strive to do is to encourage students to create projects that utilize the money that they are helping fund, right? That is incredibly important. And so that's why the student organization arm of the Green Fee is so important. And then, of course, you have the council, which is much more deliberative, and they have the ultimate authority over funding sustainable initiatives and projects. During her and I's time at the Student Green Energy Fund, we've been able to do a lot of incredible sustainable initiatives, both for St. Petersburg and Tampa. Um, Particularly in St. Petersburg last year, we funded the Green Cycle Compost Initiative, which was a part of a larger project that some of the environmental science and chemistry professors at St. Pete were working on. SGEF gave $100,000 towards a matching grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Ultimately, with an additional $50,000 from Duke Energy, we were able to have a $500,000 grant from USDA that will allow us to implement a composting system on the St. Pete campus that will almost completely eliminate food waste, which of course is a very significant contributor to not only greenhouse emissions, but just general waste, not only on the St. Pete campus, but on a global scale, right? We have a really large scale food crisis that we need to manage better. And so in St. Pete, that was our way of tackling that particular issue. And SGEF was able to fund a really significant contribution to that. We also had a wide array of projects that I'm trying to remember. So we funded a new bike fleet for campus recreation. We funded a restoration project for the campus beach, which I will expand upon more because that was my, pet project that just recently was installed. We were working with the University Student Center to implement LED lights in the USC ballrooms, which will lower their energy consumption, increase their cost savings, and of course, reduce energy, which is in turn reducing emissions. And then most recently, with help from the Green Fee Council, the Consolidated Council, this was the largest sum of funding that we voted to approve. We are going to have the Nelson Poynter Memorial Library retrofit their first floor with LEDs, which again will reduce their energy costs while also reducing their energy outputs, which will ultimately help them save emissions. And so those are just some of the projects that we've been able to help implement. The great challenge with the green fee and the Student Green Energy Fund generally is, there's so many great project ideas for what we can implement at USF. We know the areas in which we have to improve upon, but the challenge is actually getting projects off the ground and spending the time and energy seeing those projects from proposal to fulfillment. And when you're talking about projects like renewable energy infrastructure, we have solar carports over in St. Pete, which cover some of the concrete asphalt near the warehouse labs and our parking garage that are fitted with solar arrays. Those are huge renewable energy projects that were completed years ago that took a very long time to complete, with the help of offices of sustainability and staff that were designated towards getting those projects across the finish line. So I guess what I'm saying is, as student leaders, we have this incredible capacity for and energy to get these projects going and to see them through. But first and foremost, we are not students here forever. We have a limited time that we can get these projects accomplished. And, ensuring that these projects can be completed is the utmost importance, because if, a student leaves USF with a project unfulfilled or, a long-term plan not, really set in stone, then that project is at a detriment, because these sustainability projects need long-term maintenance and long-term funding. And so that is the biggest challenge. Number one, how do we get students and faculty and organizations on USF to utilize the green fee? And then number two, how do we get those projects across the finish line? And then number three, how do we sustain them long term? And that is those are the three main questions for when you're trying to manage these projects. And we've been really successful with a lot of them. We have not only incredible departments at USF who have staff determined to ensure the longevity of these projects, but we also have students who have been incredibly instrumental in getting these projects across the finish line. And so that is the great work that the Student Green Energy Fund does. It is so unique to universities in this nation. And if I must say, add on to that an Office of Sustainability, which USF does not have. Instituting an Office of Sustainability will make USF such a leader in sustainability and in making this campus not only environmentally friendly, but more resilient for the future. And it is, I feel very proud that we're part of a group of students that helped lead that charge for at least a couple years.
Just about the food sustainability and the waste management with that, I think it's, again, really interesting to see when environmental sciences and environmental studies overlaps with other disciplines. I want to work in humanitarian work, so it's really great to see that. And I know my mom works in humanitarian work, so hearing that there's other disciplines that have placed an importance on that sort of thing and also how it's beneficial in different areas is just like amazing. It's inspiring to see because you're so passionate about it, and I can see that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And humans depend on the environment. And if the environment is unhealthy and is not being sustained properly, then humans will ultimately suffer the consequences. And so I think that is something very important to keep in mind. And I think it's one of the great reasons why environmental humanities is so important and should have more emphasis.
I think that all of the initiatives that you all are working on are brilliant. Like, it's nice to know that students are really coming together and working on important things like this. Like, I wish I'm really somebody that's interested in sustainability and the environment. And although that I'm not studying these things, I would love to like find ways to get involved and stuff.
Yeah.
I had a question related to leading these large scale sustainability initiatives. I imagine that it can be overwhelming when there's so many pressing issues that need to be addressed. What is it like, first of all, leading these projects and then picking what you see as like one of the most important issues and addressing it as opposed to something else maybe?
So for our organization, one of the guiding documents, if you will, that really helped us focus on what the university needs in terms of sustainability initiatives and the projects that we could implement was the climate action plan. That the last climate action plan that was fulfilled was in 2016. That's when the last one was released. USF hasn't done one since, but regardless though, those same issues prevail here at USF. We know that a large contributor of emissions is transportation. We have a lot of commuters at USF. And that is a very complicated issue to try and resolve, right? Because people love their cars. Cars are very personal. And, you know, it's also about culture change, right? That is an immensely complicated issue that, you know, may not be solved in 4 years, but over a long period of time, with the right infrastructure and the right motivations of folks involved, can absolutely drive change forward.
Especially here in Florida. I mean,
Oh my
we
gosh,
we
yes.
need cars
Yeah.
to get
Absolutely.
everywhere. It doesn't make it any easier. I know that like St. Pete, at least you have like St. Petersburg students have access to the is it the bus or the tram that goes around?
No,
No.
no. There's no bull runners that go to
Oh
St.
my gosh,
Petersburg.
there's not.
No.
No way.
And I actually talked to the director of parking and transportation a couple weeks ago because I wanted to see if maybe this was a problem that could have some sort of solution attached to it by the year's end in the spring. But there's so many logistics that are needed to be, you know, not only studied and analyzed and confirmed before you could go ahead with a program like that. It's not as easy as, yeah, just send a bull runner over at this time, this time, and this time. There's, if the bus is running on fossil fuels, what's the cost of refueling the bus? The labor of the person or people driving the bus. If you are using a bus that runs on electricity or is hybrid, what infrastructure exists to charge the bus in St. Petersburg and Tampa? And if you are to move forward with a program like that, does it have funding to sustain these buses long term? And those are the kinds of questions. Well, most importantly, is there a need, right? How many students have dual need on the St. Petersburg campus and Tampa campus? How many Sarasota Manatee students have dual need on Sarasota Manatee and St. Petersburg? Are there students that have needs on all three campuses? That information needs to be collected before any of these kinds of programs can be implemented, unfortunately.
Right.
I wish it was easier, right? But you need data to back these kinds of programs up. And there hasn't been a focused, consolidated effort on this matter. I'm with you. It is surprising that there is no bull runner program between campuses, but it would take a lot of planning that right now USF just doesn't have the capacity for, personnel wise, right? And that goes to with saying, if there are students who are interested in planning, in transportation, that want to take these projects on through opportunities like the Green Fee, those opportunities do exist. It's just a matter of talking to students and departments and faculty about these issues and saying, are you willing to help us solve these problems? I will say there is an incredible group here on campus that parking and transportation is using to help not only create efficiency and improve the bull runner program, but potentially to see whether there is a viability of expanding the bull runner program to other campuses. But to your point, right, the logistics and the data that you need to implement these programs, it just doesn't exist right now, and it would be a multi-year effort to implement those programs.
So you talked a little bit about, you're a student, you only have 4 years, and I'm sure that you've only had a couple of semesters within the organization to complete the programs and initiatives that you're working towards. How do you, kind of pass that down to the next generation of students? And how do you pass down your same goals? Because you kind of need a sense of unity when it comes to that.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. Every organization at USF understands the importance of creating a plan for the future leadership of these organizations. Luckily, the Student Green Energy Fund has been fortunate enough to have really dedicated students enter the organization through pure interest and then grow into leaders as leaders of these really important organizations. I myself got involved with SGEF because I went to a random SGEF event my freshman year in the fall. And that led to me attending meetings, becoming a voting member, running for the e-board, and then garnering these really important positions of power in these organizations. And so that's one of the most important questions that these organizations face. How do we maintain the longevity of our organizations? And luckily, with the Student Green Energy Fund, we have not only environmental science students, but now we're seeing a lot of biology students becoming involved with our organization who are well prepared to take the mantle and keep the progress going. And that is very encouraging to see. And it is something that has to be built upon. Unfortunately, life never stops. You have to keep the flow of people moving through these organizations. And that's difficult. It is objectively difficult. There might be years where there is low interest, but there might be a motivated few that, maybe the next year they see an uptick in interest in an organization, and then we go from there. I will tell you that the pandemic really hit SGEF hard, we relied a lot on hands-on volunteering and communication with not only SGEF members, but with the greater USF St. Pete community. And I mean, we have seen a complete rebound from when I was a freshman and participation in SGEF was relatively low to now, where we have not only incredible following from members of USF St. Pete and across the USF community, but departments are starting to utilize the funding again. Faculty are starting to utilize the funding, and students are starting to utilize the funding again. And that, gives me so much hope because it shows that people still care.
Especially with something like environmental science where it's not something easy to get into or easy to push forward given how many factors are kind of against it or push it to the side. I know in political science, it's not necessarily something that people put in the forefront, even though, like you said, humans need the environment and it's like that mutual relationship. So it's kind of, I guess, disheartening to hear that sometimes interest is lower depending on students, but it's also great to hear that you're able to pass that down to the next students and kind of see the next generation of students coming up and doing what you did and carrying it on.
It's just the name of the game with leading organizations. It happens. And it's not because, there's disinterest, might be because, maybe marketing and communications about an organization was relatively low the year before, or it's just because there's just not a lot of students who are willing to get involved. Maybe they just want to focus more on classes, not necessarily leadership. And that is totally okay. But when you do have large influxes of students who enter an organization with the purpose of getting involved and garnering leadership experiences, I mean, you really do see organizations flourish. And I think it is a pretty common pattern where you have a cohort of students, maybe of multiple years in their college experience, who really carry an organization through several years of great success. And when you get into that flow pattern of leadership and then those people depart, it can take a while for that leadership to return. And that's completely normal in an organization. And I've been really thankful and grateful that we've had a great cohort of students that, it's not ending with me. It is continuing for several years now. But we've been very grateful to have an incredible cohort of leadership, especially within the Student Green Energy Fund these past 3 years.
I also think that, as the years progress, and especially as students here in the state of Florida, environmental issues are all around us, especially in the wetlands and the coasts as well. I feel like those are kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but the first places to kind of feel the difference.
Most certainly.
Yeah. So I think that it's really like kind of pushing students to be more involved in those things. And I think that most people like to be involved in leadership. Not only is it like beneficial to them, developing their careers, but you can also like find your voice and what you believe in when you get involved like that. So alongside your leadership roles, you're actually also doing a lot of research. You're doing research through the Geospatial Analytics Laboratory on food deserts in St. Petersburg. Can you walk us through a little bit about what that project is?
So my work at the Geospatial Analytics Lab included studying food deserts, which are essentially inaccessibilities to fresh and nutritious food in areas that are often socioeconomically and geographically vulnerable. And so in the city of St. Petersburg, in the Southside communities, there are food deserts that have persisted for decades. And so the work that I did at Giselle was studying how those food deserts changed in variability from decade to decade, especially with the last, because there have been several important food stores in South St. Petersburg that have closed within the past decade. And that has left a lot of the populations there without access to fresh and nutritious food. And the supermarkets that do exist as an outlet for folks to grab fresh and nutritious food are sometimes incredibly inaccessible, both socioeconomically and physically. If there's a food store that's close to you, this was the case with many communities there. If there is a food store that was close to you, for instance, a Walmart supercenter, you could access that store very easily. But oftentimes, residents in the community found that the food was unaffordable in and of itself. And so now you're facing multiple barriers of just simply accessing food that is nutritious to feed your families. And so that was part of the work that I did at Giselle.
So you've also done research here at the Honors College on environmental degradation and recently received the Anita Cutting Outstanding Honors Thesis Award. So congratulations. But I just wanted to ask you what inspired you to research this topic and how you plan on carrying it out in the future.
Yeah. So as many honors students know, part of your Judy Genshaft Honors College requirements is either a capstone or a thesis. And so I decided to go the thesis route for that requirement. And so essentially what that entails is for 2 semesters, you take a thesis 1 and then a thesis 2 semester. Some people do fall and spring, some people do spring and fall. It just, depends on when those classes fall into your schedule. And so my thesis focused on Bay Borough Harbor, which serves as the waterfront for the USF St. Pete campus. Surprisingly, Bay Borough is surrounded by so many institutions that are important to the city of St. Petersburg. USF St. Pete campus, there's a Coast Guard station there. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission has their research institute there. You have the Harborage Marina, NOAA Southeast Fisheries, Tampa Bay Estuary Program. There are public parks there. It is surrounded by so much life and industry and education and research. And yet, this harbor that has served as the catalyst of so much growth and development for the city of St. Petersburg has not really a well-compiled history from its development up until the present day. And so I found that knowledge gap in research and decided to pursue it. And it was a really cool opportunity because it allowed me to expand a little more beyond just environmental sciences and biology and GIS that I focus on as, academically. But I was also able to tap into some of the other subject matters that I found really interesting, like history. And so I decided to investigate a thorough history of Bay Borough Harbor. And I'm going to preface this by saying that if, honors students who are pursuing their thesis have an opportunity to look through some of the archives that USF libraries have here. I know that the student library here on the Tampa campus has an incredible archive. The Nelson Poynter Library has an incredible archive. Utilize those resources. And because I was fortunate enough to access the Nelson Poynter archives, and it truly allowed me to find a definite guidance towards the kind of research that I wanted to focus on. The library archivist, Ali Vargas Minor over in the St. Pete campus helped me. I remember I was just starting to research this topic, and I reached out to Ali and said, hey, are there any collections about Bay Borough Harbor that you know of? And she said, there are the Brames collections, and she gave me a couple other resources, and I was able to go into the archiving room and actually look at scans of historical documents that date back, all the way to the early 1900s about Bay Borough. And in talking with Ali, she gave me additional resources that I could utilize for finding out more information about Bay Borough Harbor. Because, as I said, in the early parts of this research project, I was finding that there really wasn't any well-documented or compiled information about Bay Borough Harbor's history, especially the ecosystems and habitats that existed before there was a harbor. That really is shrouded in this cloud of mystery. And Ali gave me this guidance towards a data collection on the Google newspaper archive. And it essentially, in searching this archive, I was able to find huge amounts of scanned historical newspapers from primarily two independent newspapers from the early 1900s through to the present day. And that's the Evening Independent and the St. Petersburg Times, which is now the Tampa Bay Times. The Evening Independent and the St. Pete Times have scanned newspaper documents that at times go all the way back to the late 1800s. And so in looking through these newspapers, I was able to gain at times almost first primary source perspective on the history of Bay Borough Harbor. And so I went through Evening Independent articles and St. Pete Times articles chronologically by year, basically just searching through newspaper scans that had the word Bay Borough in them, at times years at a time. And what that gave me was at times a almost daily chronological documentation of Bay Borough Harbor's development. And so through my research, I was able to determine that before Bay Borough Harbor became the city of St. Petersburg's first industrial port, it was a string of bayous and salt marshes and mudflats that was known as Fiddler's Paradise because of the abundance of fiddler crabs that lived amongst this marsh ecosystem. And then in 1907, the Bay Borough Investment Company, led by Carrie Albert Harvey, skirted around the city of St. Petersburg's ongoing debate about how to use the city waterfront. If you know the city of St. Petersburg waterfront today, it is quite literally just green space oftentimes. There's the pier, but there's also really large parks like Vinoy Park that is used constantly for recreation. And that's really unique for a lot of urban cities. You don't see the coast preserved as green space oftentimes as you would like to see. Often it's developed right up to the waterfront. That's not the case with the city of St. Petersburg. And that's in part because of a lot of ongoing debates in the early 1900s with the city council as to what to do with the waterfront. So the Bay Borough Investment Company skirts around these debates and ends up developing the city's first industrial port within these bayous and salt marshes and mudflats. And that dredging and development stretches into Salt Creek and Booker Creek, which are these brackish water tidal tributaries towards Bay Borough Harbor. And from that first dredging of Bay Borough Harbor, you see from the decades following, not only more development, ultimately the development and dredging of the port of St. Petersburg would follow. Decades after the dredging of Bay Borough Harbor, environmental degradation would ensue in many different forms. Raw sewage from the city was dumped into Bay Borough Harbor because there were not proper facilities to treat that raw sewage coming from the city's urban centers. You would see a lot of nutrient eutrophication and a lot of harm to marine life as a result. And as development of this, former coastal system increased, and you had a naval station established there during the 1950s and 40s, as you had the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg establish its waterfront there, as you had, the Harbridge Marina become installed there. Environmental degradation and really tremendous stories of the extent of environmental pollution that persists at Bay Borough Harbor, I found was completely documented in full through these newspaper data collections. And it's not well documented, but they exist. That information is there. And I was able to go in and compile really detailed documentations of how our harbor has been developed and its development throughout the last over nearly 120 years. And so through exploring those archives, I've not only uncovered and compiled a really detailed history of Bay Borough Harbor, but I've also been able to, through those archives, reconstruct what once existed there. We know that there were bayous and that there were salt marshes and mudflats there, but this information isn't well known to the public. It's not displayed in public education, and it's not taught to the greater public, and especially not USF St. Petersburg students. And so when I ultimately finished my thesis this past summer, Dr. Wilkins, who was one of the advisors and professors who helped me through thesis 1 and 2, not 2, just thesis 1, Dr. Blaise Marpet took on thesis 2. And my advisor, Dr. James Ivey, who I've had, I think, at least 7 or 8 environmental science classes with. He just keeps teaching them, and they're required for me. So I've taken his class at least like 7 times. I was able to work with them, complete this thesis this past summer. And when I received the Anita Cutting Award, which I feel so grateful that that kind of work is being recognized, I've been working with Dr. Wilkins to create a public education event, which will talk about the full compiled history of Bay Borough Harbor that I have reviewed in my thesis. And Dr. Wilkins and I have also been working with Preserve the Berg, which is the Historic Preservation Society in St. Petersburg. We've applied for a Florida Environmental Humanities grant from the Florida Humanities Council. And our hope is that that funding will be used for the education event, but also to install educational signage at the waterfront on our campus about the history of Bay Borough Harbor. And so that is just the extent to which I've been able to utilize the funding from this thesis and the recognition I've gotten from this thesis to, charge forward with presenting the history of this rather forgotten harbor to the greater public of the city of St. Pete.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. All the research that went into this, it's like you really got to paint the picture, the story of what happened. And I think that helps communities like that in St. Pete be better educated and understand what used to be there and, what happened throughout the years and what it is now and what we should be doing, because ultimately we need our environment, and also the environment now needs us to help it, right? So I think all of that work that you were doing, and I'm so glad that you were presented with that award, because it's going to allow for you to continue. Really excited to see what other things you work on throughout the years. But thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
We are back in the studio. What did you think about today's episode?
I absolutely love this episode. I love anything environmental science and policy. It's something that I have such a great interest in. I loved hearing about the composting project that they incorporated onto the St. Pete campus. I had no idea that happened, and about the Student Green Energy Fund. It's so interesting to see all these different initiatives that are going on behind the scenes, and that so many students are really interested in driving these forward.
Yeah. And also like how much autonomy they have being just leaders in student organizations as opposed to like really working and having a career in it already. The fact that they get a head start and the fact that they're able to influence so much change with the fund from the state that he was talking about. I just think it's really cool.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in learning more about this, you can check out the USF Honors website, and specifically the St. Petersburg Honors website. But with that said, don't forget to check the Honor Roll newsletter and our website at usf.edu/honors for all upcoming events, updates, and news. That'll do it for this week's episode. The Honor Roll podcast is recorded in the Judy Genschaft Honors College at the University of South Florida Tampa campus. Production assistance is provided by USF students Sandra Napolitano and Valma Shah. Thank you all so much for listening, and please do not forget to rate and review our podcast, as we really appreciate your feedback. Tune in next time to hear more honor stories and talk to more members of the Judy Genschaft Honors College.
Until next time, go Bulls!